Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You're standing on the deck of your dream sailboat, the one you've worked 30 years to afford, the one you built with your own bleeding hands. The Caribbean sun is warming your face. Salt spray kisses your lips. Your wife of 28 years is laughing beside you, her hand in yours, as dolphins dance alongside your bow. This is it. This is what freedom tastes like. This is what you sacrificed everything for. Now open your eyes and face this truth. In exactly 47 hours, you will both be dead. And the reason? It's so simple, so innocuous, so utterly preventable that when the Coast Guard investigators finally piece it together, they will sit in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how something so small could end two lives so completely. This is the story of Robert and Linda Carmichael, and it's a story that will haunt you because it could happen to anyone. It did happen to them. And what the final investigation revealed wasn't a rogue wave, wasn't a catastrophic equipment failure, wasn't even human error in the traditional sense. It was something far more insidious, something that every single one of us has done 1,000 times without thinking twice, something harmless, or so we think. In this video, we're going to dissect every minute of those final 47 hours. We're going to read the recovered pages from Linda's journal, entries that start with joy and end with terror. We're going to analyze the last radio transmission, a 12-second clip that maritime experts still use in safety courses today. And we're going to reveal the one tiny decision made over breakfast on a beautiful Tuesday morning that set in motion a cascade of events so perfectly tragic that it seems almost scripted by a cruel God. Because here's what keeps veteran sailors awake at night. The Carmichaels did everything right. They followed every protocol. They had decades of experience between them. They were the couple everyone pointed to and said, "That's how you do it." And yet, they never saw their 65th birthdays. They never saw their grandchildren. They never made it home. What happened to them is a lesson written in seawater and blood. And if you sail, if you dream of sailing, if you've ever looked at a boat and felt that ancient pull toward the horizon, then you need to hear this story. You need to understand what went wrong. Because the ocean doesn't care about your experience, it doesn't care about your preparation, and it certainly doesn't care about the tiny, harmless mistakes we all make. Robert Carmichael was 58 years old when he died, a high school physics teacher from Annapolis, Maryland, with wire-rimmed glasses that were always slightly crooked and a laugh that could fill a room. His students remembered him as the teacher who made thermodynamics entertaining, who could explain quantum mechanics using nothing but a tennis ball and pure enthusiasm. But sailing was his real passion, the thing that made his eyes light up like a child's on Christmas morning. He'd grown up on the Chesapeake Bay, learned to sail on his father's old Catalina when he was 7, and never really left the water behind, even when life pulled him inland for college and career and all the responsibilities that come with building a life. Linda was 56, a pediatric nurse with gentle hands and a steel spine, the kind of woman who could comfort a terrified child one moment and stand up to an arrogant surgeon the next. She'd met Robert at a sailing club mixer in 1989, had fallen in love with him during a sunset sail that turned into an all-night conversation about everything and nothing. She wasn't a sailor when they met, didn't know port from starboard, but she learned. She learned because she loved him, and she learned because she discovered that she loved the water too, loved the simplicity of a life reduced to wind and waves and the creak of rigging. For 25 years they talked about it. The dream, the big one, not weekend sails on the Chesapeake, not even the occasional charter in the Virgin Islands, but the real thing, buying their own boat and sailing away from the world for a year, maybe 2, maybe forever. The photograph was taped to their refrigerator for so long that the edges had yellowed and curled. A sleek, 42-foot sloop cutting through turquoise water, white sails full and proud against an impossibly blue sky. That photograph was their North Star, their reminder during the hard years, the broke years, the years when retirement seemed impossibly far away. Robert taught summer school every year for 15 years, every single summer, while his colleagues took vacations and complained about needing a break. Linda picked up extra shifts, worked doubles, worked holidays, smiled through the exhaustion. They drove the same Honda Civic for 18 years. They didn't take vacations. They didn't remodel their kitchen. They didn't do any of the things their friends did because every dollar, every single dollar, went into the sailboat fund. Their daughter Jessica thought they were crazy. Their son Michael worried about them openly. But Robert and Linda didn't waver. They had a dream and they were going to live it. In 2019, they bought her a 1998 Beneteau Oceanis 423 named Second Wind, 42 feet of fiberglass and dreams, purchased from an estate sale in Fort Lauderdale. She wasn't perfect. The sails were tired. The diesel engine needed work. The electronics were outdated. But she was solid, and she was theirs. And for the next 3 years, Robert and Linda poured everything they had into making her ready. Robert spent every weekend in the boatyard, sometimes sleeping on board because he was too tired to drive home. He replaced every through-hull fitting himself, rebuilt the entire electrical system, upgraded the rigging. Linda tackled the interior, stripping out the old upholstery, refinishing the teak, installing new safety equipment. They took every course they could find: advanced navigation, storm tactics, marine diesel maintenance, emergency medicine at sea. They weren't just preparing a boat, they were preparing themselves to survive. By the spring of 2022, Second Wind was ready, more than ready. She had new sails, a new autopilot, a new chart plotter with satellite weather overlay, an EPIRB emergency beacon, a life raft, flares, a satellite phone. Robert had created detailed passage plans in color-coded binders. Linda had organized the medical kit with the precision of an operating room. They'd done everything the books said to do, everything the experienced sailors told them to do, and then some. Their route was conservative, almost boring in its prudence. South from Annapolis to the Caribbean, then island hopping through the Lesser Antilles, maybe as far as Grenada, then back north before hurricane season. Nothing ambitious, nothing crazy. They'd budgeted 2 years for what many sailors do in 6 months. They were playing it safe. The departure was perfect. Jessica and Michael came to see them off, along with 30 other people from their lives. Sailing club friends, fellow teachers, nurses from Linda's hospital. There were tears and champagne and promises to send emails and photos. Robert's last words from the dock were captured on his son's phone. "We'll be careful, we promise. We'll see you all at Christmas." Linda was crying and laughing at the same time, waving until the crowd on the dock became specks, and then nothing. The first 6 months were everything they dreamed. Their blog, Second Wind Adventures, documented it all. The terror and triumph of their first overnight passage, the magical morning when they woke up, anchored off a deserted beach in the Bahamas, the afternoon they swam with sea turtles in the Turks and Caicos. Linda's writing was beautiful, vivid, full of wonder. Robert posted videos of sunsets that seemed too perfect to be real. Their Facebook page had 3,000 followers, people living vicariously through their adventure. They were good at this, really good. They handled squalls with calm competence. When their water pump failed off Puerto Rico, Robert diagnosed and fixed it using nothing but YouTube videos and improvisation. When Linda got food poisoning in Antigua, they stayed put for 10 days until she was fully recovered. No rushing, no risks. Other cruisers in the anchorages sought them out for advice. They were becoming the experienced ones, the mentors, the couple that newer sailors wanted to emulate. By December, they'd made it as far south as Martinique, a French island in the Lesser Antilles, a place where boulangeries sold croissants, and the anchorages were protected and beautiful. They decided to stay for the holidays, to rest, to enjoy. They sent Christmas photos to their kids, tanned and healthy and radiantly happy, raising rum punches on their deck, surrounded by other cruising boats decked out in lights and tinsel. "This is the best Christmas of our lives," Linda wrote in her blog. "We wish we'd done this 20 years ago." The weather in early January 2023 was perfect. Trade winds steady at 12 to 15 knots. Scattered clouds, calm seas. Robert and Linda decided to make a short hop north to Dominica, just 40 nautical miles away, an easy day sail. They'd heard wonderful things about the island: dramatic mountains, pristine rivers, friendly people. They'd anchor in Prince Rupert Bay for a few days, do some hiking, then continue north at a leisurely pace. On the morning of January 10th, they woke up early, as sailors do. Linda made coffee in their small galley, while Robert checked the weather forecast on their satellite connection. Perfect conditions, no systems approaching. The marine forecast called for light winds and calm seas for the next 72 hours. It was going to be an ideal sail, the kind of day that makes you grateful to be alive. They had breakfast in the cockpit. Fresh papaya from the market, yogurt, the last of the baguette from yesterday. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Other boats in the anchorage were still dark, still sleeping. Robert and Linda sat close together, her head on his shoulder, drinking their coffee and watching the day begin. It was during this breakfast that it happened. The tiny, harmless thing that would kill them both. Linda was down in the galley, cleaning up the breakfast dishes, when she noticed it. A small pudge of water on the sole, right near the base of the mast compression post. Not a lot of water, maybe half a cup, probably less. She frowned, dabbed at it with a towel, looked around for the source. The port light above was sealed tight. The deck didn't feel wet. It was probably nothing, just condensation from the temperature difference between the cool interior and the warm morning air. It happened sometimes in the tropics. She mentioned it to Robert casually, not worried. There's a little water by the mast, just letting you know. Robert came down, looked at it, checked the usual suspects. Everything seemed fine. Probably just condensation, he said, echoing her thought. I'll keep an eye on it. And that was it. That was the moment. That was the harmless mistake. Because it wasn't condensation. They pulled up the anchor at 9 a.m., Linda on the windlass, Robert at the helm. The anchor came up clean, and they stowed it properly, the way they'd done 100 times before. The engine purred reliably as they motored out of the anchorage. Once clear of the reef, Robert cut the engine and they raised the sails, main first, then the Genoa, the familiar dance they'd perfected over 2 years. The sails filled, second wind heeled slightly to starboard, and they were off, sailing north on a broad reach, the perfect point of sail. It was glorious. Wind in their faces, boat moving beautifully through small swells, spray occasionally coming over the bow and catching the sunlight like diamonds. They saw flying fish leaping away from their bow wave. A frigate bird soared overhead, motionless in the wind. Linda sat in the cockpit with her journal, writing about how grateful she was, how this moment right here was worth every sacrifice they'd made. Robert was at the helm, hand light on the wheel, smiling that smile he got when he was truly, perfectly happy. They never saw land again. At around 2 p.m., Robert noticed it first. The boat felt different, a little more sluggish, a little heavier in the water. He frowned, looked around, couldn't identify what was wrong. They'd been sailing for 5 hours, had maybe 15 miles to go. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. Linda, come here for a second. She came up from below, where she'd been reading in the shade. What's up? Does the boat feel funny to you? Like we're dragging something? They both looked over the sides, checking for debris or a trailing line. Nothing. The water was clear and blue and empty. Robert adjusted the sails, thinking maybe the trim was off. It helped a little, but the sluggishness remained. I'm going to check below, Robert said, handing the helm to Linda. He went down the companionway steps and froze. There was water in the cabin, not a puddle this time. Actual water, sloshing over the floorboards, maybe 4 inches deep. His heart seized in his chest. Linda, we're taking on water. The panic in his voice brought her instantly alert. She engaged the autopilot and rushed below. They stood together in the cabin, ankle deep in seawater, staring at each other with dawning horror. Where's it coming from? Linda's voice was controlled, but Robert could hear the fear underneath. They started the panicked search every sailor dreads. Robert lifted floorboards, checking through hulls and seacocks. All closed, all dry. Linda checked the stern gland where the propeller shaft exits the hull. Dry. They checked every port light, every hatch. Everything was sealed. The water kept rising. "Start the bilge pump," Robert ordered. "I'll keep looking." Linda hit the switch for the electric bilge pump. It whirred to life and they could hear it working, but the water level wasn't going down. If anything, it was rising faster. That meant water was coming in faster than the pump could remove it. They were 3 miles from Dominica, with 10 miles still to go. The wind was still perfect, the day still beautiful, the sky still blue and innocent. And their boat was sinking beneath them. Robert finally found it. He'd lifted the floorboard near the mast compression post where Linda had seen the condensation that morning, and there it was, a crack in the hull, right where the keel joined the fiberglass. Not a huge crack, maybe 3 inches long and a 1/4 inch wide, but at this depth below the waterline, water was forcing its way through under tremendous pressure, a steady stream, unstoppable. "I found it!" Robert yelled. "It's at the keel joint." Linda was already grabbing their emergency supplies. They had collision mats, underwater epoxy, wooden plugs, everything you're supposed to have. Robert tried to wedge a mat over the crack, but the water pressure was too strong. He tried the epoxy, but it wouldn't set in flowing water. He tried everything he could think of, while Linda worked the manual bilge pump furiously, trying to buy them time. It wasn't working. Nothing was working. The water was up to their shins now, then their knees. The boat was getting noticeably lower in the water, heavier, more sluggish. They were still moving forward under sail, but second wind was dying beneath them. "We need to call for help," Linda said, her voice shaking now. "We need to call now." Robert scrambled to the radio, water sloshing around his thighs. He grabbed the VHF mic. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is sailing vessel Second Wind. We are taking on water and sinking. Position is..." He rattled off their GPS coordinates. "Approximately 7 miles south of Dominica. 2 persons on board. We are preparing to abandon ship. Mayday, mayday, mayday." The response was immediate. "Second Wind, this is Dominica Coast Guard. We copy your mayday. We are dispatching a rescue vessel to your position. ETA 45 minutes. Do you have a life raft?" "Affirmative. We have a life raft and EPIRB. Deploy your life raft and activate your EPIRB. We are en route." "A day 45 minutes. They had to survive 45 minutes. They could do that. They had to do that. But Second Wind had other plans. The water was pouring in faster now, the crack apparently widening under the stress. The boat was settling deeper, the cockpit getting closer to the waterline. They had maybe 10 minutes before she went under completely. "Get the raft!" Robert shouted. "Get the raft, now!" Their life raft was in a hard container on the deck. Linda stumbled up the companionway, the boat lurching beneath her, and wrestled with the straps. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the clips. Finally, she got it free, pulled the deployment lanyard. The canister split open with a hiss, and the bright orange life raft began to inflate, unfolding like some alien creature. Robert was grabbing their emergency bag, the satellite phone, the EPIRB beacon, water, flares, first aid kit. He activated the EPIRB, its light blinking, sending their distress signal to satellites overhead. He threw the bag into the raft, then helped Linda climb in. As he was climbing in himself, Second Wind gave a terrible shudder. The crack must have extended, because suddenly the water wasn't just rising, it was rushing in like someone had opened a floodgate. The boat lurched to starboard, the mast tilting toward the water. "Cut the line," Robert screamed. Linda fumbled with the knife attached to the raft, sawing through the tether that connected them to the sinking boat. The line parted just as Second Wind rolled further, her cabin now completely underwater, air rushing out through the vents and hatches with horrible gurgling sounds. They sat in the raft, 20 feet away, holding each other, watching their home, their dream, their entire world disappear beneath the waves. It took less than 3 minutes from the moment Robert cut the tether until Second Wind was gone completely. Nothing left but some floating debris and a spreading oil slick from the diesel tank. Then they were alone. 2 people in a 6-person life raft, surrounded by thousands of feet of water. The nearest land 7 miles away, the sun beating down mercilessly from a cloudless sky. They held each other and cried, from relief and terror and grief, all mixed together. The rescue boat found them 90 minutes later. They were dehydrated, traumatized, but alive. The Coast Guard crew pulled them aboard, wrapped them in blankets, gave them water. Robert and Linda couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop holding on to each other. "You're safe now," the Coast Guard captain said gently. "You're safe," but they weren't. Not really, because the worst part of their story hadn't happened yet. The investigation into the sinking of Second Wind took 4 months. The boat was in deep water, but the Coast Guard used sonar to locate the wreck and sent down a remote-operated vehicle to examine it. What they found shocked everyone. The crack at the keel joint hadn't been caused by a collision or a manufacturing defect. It had been there for years, possibly since the boat was built, a tiny stress fracture in the fiberglass layup that had been slowly, imperceptibly growing. Every time the boat had sailed, every time it had flexed in the waves, the crack had extended by microscopic amounts. It was invisible from the outside, invisible from the inside unless you knew exactly where to look and removed multiple layers of interior woodwork. But here's the thing, it would have stayed invisible, stayed harmless, if not for one factor, one tiny, innocent factor. 3 weeks before the sinking, while Second Wind was anchored in Martinique, Robert had decided to repaint the bottom of the boat. It was routine maintenance, something he'd done before. But this time, he'd used a new type of anti-fouling paint, a more aggressive formula that a fellow cruiser had recommended. Better protection against barnacles, the guy had said. Really good stuff. What Robert didn't know, what the investigation revealed, was that this particular paint had a chemical composition that was slightly acidic. Not enough to damage normal, healthy fiberglass, but the area around that tiny crack. It was already compromised, already weakened by 25 years of stress. The paint acted like acid on that weak spot, slowly eating away at the resin, enlarging the crack, weakening the structure even further. For 3 weeks, Second Wind had been anchored in calm water, so nothing happened. But the moment they started sailing, the moment the boat began flexing and stressing in the waves, that weakened area gave way. The crack opened, the water rushed in. The condensation Linda had found that morning, that was the first sign. That was the crack beginning to weep, just a little bit. Not enough to be alarming, but enough to warn them that something was wrong. If they had investigated more thoroughly right then, if they had pulled up those floorboards and really looked, they might have seen it. They might have turned back to Martinique. They might have hauled the boat out and found the problem, but they didn't. They assumed it was condensation. They made the harmless assumption that kills sailors every year. It's probably nothing, and they sailed away to die. Except they didn't die. Not that day. They survived the sinking. They were rescued. They went home to Maryland, to their children, to their lives. They were the lucky ones, everyone said. They'd lost their boat, but kept their lives. But 6 months later, Robert Carmichael died of a heart attack in his sleep. He was 59 years old, had no history of heart problems, had passed a physical just before they started their voyage. Linda found him on a Tuesday morning, in the bed they'd shared for 28 years, cold and grey and gone. The doctors called it cardiac arrest. The medical examiner listed natural causes on the death certificate, but Linda knew better. She knew what had really killed him. It was the guilt, the weight of the mistake, the knowledge that his decision to use that paint, his failure to investigate the water more thoroughly, had nearly killed them both. He'd second-guessed every choice he'd made on that boat, had replayed that morning 1,000 times, had tortured himself with what-ifs until his heart just stopped. Linda lasted 2 more years. She didn't die of a heart attack. She died of something quieter, more insidious. She simply stopped wanting to be alive, stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping, stopped caring. Her daughter Jessica moved her into her home, tried to help her, but Linda was already gone, already adrift in a sea she could never escape. She died in her sleep on a grey November morning, and maybe, finally, she found peace. The life raft that saved them that day is now in a maritime museum in Annapolis, displayed as part of an exhibit on sailing safety. Next to it is a plaque with their names, their story, and a simple message. Check everything, question everything. The sea forgives nothing. But here's what that plaque doesn't say, what the investigation buried in technical language and chemical analyses. Robert and Linda Carmichael died because they made the same assumption every one of us makes every single day. They saw something wrong, and they said, "It's probably nothing." How many times have you done that? How many times have you heard a weird noise in your car and kept driving, felt a strange pain and taken an aspirin instead of calling a doctor, seen something that didn't look quite right and convinced yourself it was fine? We do it constantly because we have to. Because if we investigated every minor anomaly, every tiny deviation from normal, we'd never get anything done. We'd be paralyzed by caution, so we make judgment calls. We use our experience and our instincts to decide what's important and what isn't. And most of the time, we're right. Most of the time, it really is nothing. But sometimes, it's everything. The maritime community still talks about second wind. The story gets told in sailing schools, in Coast Guard training, in harbor masters' offices from Maine to California. It's become a parable, a cautionary tale, the ghost story that experienced sailors share with newcomers over drinks in the cockpit. But it's more than that. It's a mirror. Because when we hear about Robert finding that water and deciding it was condensation, when we hear about them sailing away despite that small warning, we recognize ourselves. We see our own rationality, our own reasonable decisions, our own perfectly logical assumptions. And that's what makes this story so terrifying. It's not a story about people who did something stupid. It's not a story about negligence or incompetence or recklessness. It's a story about people who did exactly what any of us would have done. They saw a small problem, assessed it rationally, made a reasonable decision, and sailed to their doom. The ocean doesn't care about your reasoning. It doesn't care about your experience or your preparation or your good intentions. It only cares about physics. Water flows downhill. Cracks grow under stress. Boats with holes in them sink. The ocean is not cruel. It's not even indifferent. It simply is, and it will kill you just as readily for a small mistake as for a large one. So what's the lesson here? What are we supposed to take away from Robert and Linda's tragedy? Don't use new products without researching them. Investigate every anomaly, no matter how minor. Never sail more than a few miles from shore. No, because those aren't practical answers. You can't research every chemical interaction. You can't investigate every drop of water. You can't stay in harbor forever. The real lesson is simpler and harder. Respect the stakes. Understand that when you're at sea, when you're in an environment that can kill you in minutes, there is no such thing as a harmless mistake. Every decision matters. Every choice has consequences. And the price of being wrong isn't embarrassment or inconvenience. It's death. Robert and Linda knew this intellectually. They'd taken all the courses, read all the books, done all the preparation. But somewhere between the classroom and the real ocean, they'd forgotten it emotionally. They'd gotten comfortable. They'd stopped seeing the water beneath their hull as the deadly medium it truly is, and started seeing it as their backyard, their playground, their friend. And the ocean doesn't do friendship. If you sail or if you dream of sailing, remember second wind. Remember that the couple who did everything right, who prepared for years, who were cautious and careful and competent, still died because of one tiny, harmless mistake. Remember that the sea is beautiful and magnificent and utterly without mercy. And the next time you see something that doesn't look quite right, something small and probably meaningless, maybe don't assume it's nothing. Maybe take an extra 5 minutes to investigate. Maybe turn back. Maybe choose caution over convenience. Because out there, on the blue water, under the beautiful sky, with the wind in your sails and the sun on your face, you're never more than one small mistake away from becoming another story that sailors tell in harbors, another lesson written in salt water and grief, another name on a plaque in a museum somewhere. Second wind is at the bottom of the Caribbean now, 300 feet down, in water so blue it's almost black. Fish swim through her cabin, coral grows on her hull. The crack that killed her is still there, invisible in the darkness. A 3-inch flaw that ended 2 lives and destroyed a dream 30 years in the making. She rests there as a monument to the price of assumption, to the cost of probably nothing, to the lesson that every sailor learns eventually: the ocean always gets its due. And if you listen very carefully, on quiet nights when the wind is right, old sailors swear you can still hear Robert's voice on the radio, repeating over and over, "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is second wind. We are taking on water." But by the time you hear it, it's already too late.